Hello and welcome to Boostring, bringing Willamette to you. My name's Tiffany Newton and I'm the Director of Graduate Alumni Engagement here at Willamette University. Today's conversation features Andrew Galen, Contributing Associate Professor for Willamette University's Atkinson Graduate School of Management. He works as the Director of Strategic Initiatives for the United Way of the Mid-Willamette Valley, a position he has held for the last 3 years upon his graduation with an MBA from Willamette. Professor Galen will share his work with Atkinson's Philanthropic Investment for Community Impact program. This one-of-a-kind program provides invaluable insight and experience in grant management and gives students the ability to support the community in a strategic and meaningful way. Each year, students are trained, inspired, and empowered to build and manage an effective social impact investment portfolio for, again, measurable community impact. Professor Galen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, hello, everyone. Again, my name's Andrew Galen, and I'm one of the co-instructors for the Philanthropic Investment for Community Impact course, along with Nicole Thibodeau. So we're currently in the 5th year of this course. This is the 3rd year that I've been involved as the instructor, but I was fortunate enough to be a student the first year that this was offered in 2016, 2017. So it's been an exciting journey, and it's great to be able to sort of share what the students have been working on and how this has evolved over the past 5 years. So just briefly what I'll be going over today, just a course overview and what the goals are of the course, the timeline of what goes on during the year. It's a year-long course for both semesters. And then a few resources and where you can get more information about what we're up to. So this isn't the most interesting slide. I'll let everyone read the course objectives as they would like. But I just wanted to give a little bit of background on how this started. So this was initially created and taught by Nicole Thibodeau, who's an accounting and finance professor and years of experience in the industry, along with Ron Hayes, who was recently the CEO of United Way of the Mid-Willamette Valley, previously the CEO of the Marion Polk Food Share. And they were really tag teaming, leading this course with Ron's nonprofit community background and Nicole's finance and accounting background, as well as Dean Deborah Ringgold was a real champion to start this course. This is a consequential learning course where students get to administer a $150,000 grant program. So the name of the course is Philanthropic Investment for Community Impact. But the name of the course, which you can see at the bottom, or the name of the grant program, which you can see at the bottom, is the Willamette MBA Community Grant Program. So that's really more the externally focused, outward facing name of what the students are doing. Just to go through some of the learning objectives. The first one, is really to develop leadership within the sector and how do you have an impact and what does having an impact even mean? The second piece is effective communication, coordination, and cooperation skills. That's probably the most challenging part of the course is how much communication goes on to make sure everything is getting done in a timely process, that students are aligned, that we're being respectful to our stakeholders, both internal and external. This is really the piece that probably takes the most time in the course. The third is to develop appreciation and understanding of issues, challenges, and opportunities in our community. This is a very community-focused program. The granting is specifically for Marion, Polk, and Yamhill counties. So really that sort of greater Salem region. 4 is build and sustain relationships with community partners and stakeholders. Again, relationship building is a really big part of what the students are doing. That's one of the big changes from when it was my first year to where we are now, that, we've worked with some of these grantees for several years now. If someone received an award in 2018, we might still be following up with them to see what they're up to, what's happened since that investment was made. And then also really to capture a wide net, the community piece is incredibly important to make sure we're finding the right organizations that we want to invest in. And then finally, apply an effective decision-making process. So, when all those applications show up and people have a lot of different opinions, you need to have a systematic way to go through and a fair process to ultimately make tough decisions. Because, the one thing that is rung true every single year is there's much more need and a lot of great organizations in the community than we have the ability to fund. And that really is always going to be the most challenging piece of this. So just an overview of what the year really looks like. This is a very tight timeline for students to administer a grant fund, especially considering where they start when they show up the first day of class in August. Students are coming to the course with various backgrounds. Some of them, it's really their first interaction with the nonprofit sector. Some of them are coming in with years of experience. So early on in August, September is when it feels like a more formal class. We'll age about, what is the nonprofit sector, what is the state of philanthropy, and trying to learn more about what the needs in the community are. September is when we start to dig into more of the nitty gritty and getting things done. And the first piece is really identify who we are, or who we are as a cohort. One of the books that we have students read is called Give Smart, and it talks a lot about deciding where to invest begins with looking at yourself and what your passions are. So I think a lot of students come in saying, like, we need to find who's in the most need, or where the biggest gap is. And there are some measurable things that we can find. There's certainly needs analysis we can do in the community, but understanding what you are personally invested in is also very important. And then ultimately, as a cohort, to have some sort of shared understanding. So that plays itself out in sort of the first deliverable the students have is their mission, vision, values, goals, principles document. This is really the bedrock for the rest of the class. And when we get into developing the request for proposal, or when we're developing our evaluation criteria, this document we are often going back to and referencing, because this is really where students all agree about who we are, what we're trying to accomplish, how we want to treat people, how we want to treat this process. So this is it's just a very important document that they're working on then. And then also in September is students will do some outreach to the grant recipients from the previous year. So I guess I'll skip ahead in the timeline a bit. Typically in April is when checks are going out to organizations, and we have our big award celebration. We require that recipients spend that money within 1 year. So, we say, so long in April, we'll check in with you in 6 months. And that's where we are in September, is the new group of students will start to check in. It's sort of like I mentioned earlier, we view this really more as relationship building than an audit or anything like that. It's a great learning opportunity, and often the first time some students have reached out to nonprofit organizations within Marion, Polk, or Yamhill County. So it's normally really exciting for them to start to make some of those personal connections, and to see, really just to see what they're doing with the funding. October is when we're getting ready to decide what the funding is going to look like this year, or what the requests for funding are going to look like. So there's typically a community outreach event or some sort of outreach to hear from other people, other stakeholders, of what they feel like are pressing needs in the community to help guide what the students ultimately want to invest in. And then beginning to draft the letter of intent. So this is a little bit of jargon. The first year, my first year, we had one application. It was a request for proposal, the RFP. It went out and we received, 40 applications in return. One of the pieces of feedback we received from the community was it was a pretty tedious application. And so what we've done since then is a two-step application. There's an initial letter of intent, which is pretty quick and easy for organizations to fill out. It's not too cumbersome. We'll do an initial review of those who submit a letter of intent, and then a select group of those applicants will be selected to complete the full proposal. We're trying to be respectful of the applicant's time, and also respectful of the student's time. Instead of having to read, 40 or 50 giant proposals, it's like, okay, it's narrowed down a little bit. It's much more bite-sized. But it is one more thing to squeeze into this very tight timeline. So October is beginning to draft what that application is going to look like. What are the specific funding areas going to be for that given year? And then one of the big check marks towards the end of October is meeting with our advisory board. So this course has an advisory board of directors made up of local leaders and just sort of industry experts and just connections we've made along the way. The students are not accountable to the advisory board. The board is there to advise and give some expertise and answer questions. We have 2 meetings each year. The first one's in October, which is when they're just about ready to, publicly release, like, here's the application. The second meeting with the board will be in March, which is at the other end of that when they're ready to fund organizations, before they submit that publicly. And then we're really diving into the heart of the application process. So, November is when the letter of intent is released. Typically, that's a week or 2 before Thanksgiving, which lines up well. While the students are on break, that's when applications are coming in. Late November, early December will be that initial review and evaluation of the letters of intent. And then a select handful of organizations will be invited to submit the full request for proposal application. We typically have an event to walk through the RFP application and to answer any questions. And then heading into winter break, the students are released and the applicants are free to apply. So we make sure we have some communication coverage that we can answer field questions as things come in. But that's really one of the big deadlines of the course. Everything sort of builds off of this is before students go to break, applicants need to have the application ready so they can work on it. So that month off actually aligns pretty well. And then the second semester is pretty straightforward. It's only half the slide. They come back from break and have, the full request for proposal applications to review. They'll do a preliminary evaluation and then narrow it down really to a group of finalists who get invited for a site visit. And that's another opportunity to ask questions, pick up on some of the intangibles or particularly leadership questions we've learned are difficult to reflect in a written application, but you can pick up on a lot of those, or at least get more meaningful answers with the in-person site visits. There'll be a final round of evaluations, and then March is really when final decisions are made. There's that second advisory board meeting, just to walk through the process, answer any last questions that the students may have come up with. Every year is different. There's always something unique each year. And then April is really exciting. April is when checks go out the door. We typically have an awards ceremony. And then students also throughout the second semester are working on an annual report. So that can get published before they graduate. So that's sort of what the year looks like. It's a lot. It's even more than what's on this. The amount of stuff I weeded out to make this sort of digestible for 10 minutes was challenging. But I'm always blown away by what the students are able to accomplish this year. And each year it is a brand new group of students who come in, and we're sort of back from square one, depending on, what the student's background is, but the class really has continued to build on itself. It was just the RFP, and now it's the LOI RFP. The annual report was just an idea that Dean Mike Hand had and threw out there at the second board meeting a couple of years ago. And students were like, sure, we can get this done in a month. So just to give you an idea of the scale of what the students are doing, this is some of the applicant data from 2018, 2019, so 2 years ago. So our mailing list is over 1,000 people. And, we really just try to cast a wide net, make sure people are aware of our application when it's open. That year, we received 94 letters of intent, which totaled 1.8 million in funding requests, which is a lot more than the 150,000 that we have to give away. So it's quite a challenge for the students. From there, they received 760,000 full proposals. So the group that was selected to submit a full proposal. From there, the finalists, it was down to 300,000, so 16 site visits, and then ultimately 9 organizations were funded for the $150,000. This is sort of the funnel that it goes through. And then this is our full list of past grantees. If there's any organizations that really stand out or you give to or work with. We've had as few as 5 grantees in a year and as many as 11. So it's really up to the students, when they're structuring the request for proposal, what that funding is going to look like, what they're targeting. The year that there was 11, the students were looking to fund more organizations with smaller grant amounts. The year there was 5, they had the appetite to give away bigger awards. The biggest award we've given away is $50,000, which is a lot of money. And, when you only have $150,000, it's a third of your budget. So, that's some of the calculus the students have to make each year, and, what sort of impact they want to have. So just a couple resources. If you want to learn more, our annual reports from the last 2 years are really fantastic documents and have a ton of information on who the grantees were each of those years, as well as background on the students, some longer term stories of previous grantees. When you're just a month or 2 months out from when the money was given away, there's typically not a whole lot to report, but we have some interesting stories from, funding that was given away in 2017 and really what's happened, 2 or 3 or 4 years later since then. So the website is a really great resource. And then also if anyone has questions, comments, I'm always happy to talk to anyone who wants to talk about the course. So there's my email address. So I think that's all I have for the formal presentation, but happy for questions.
Wonderful. And that was such a great overview of both kind of the history of this course, but then also the ebb and flow of the process through the year and how the baton gets passed from class to class. And some of those projects continue forward and then you get to demonstrate and assess impact. I'm wondering, since you had the benefit of being both in the inaugural class, so one of the first kind of test subjects in this consequential learning experience, and now you're a professor for it, if you could talk a little bit about some of the triumphs and challenges you've had both from the student side and then in supporting students in what is really this amazing lab kind of experience. I mean, where else would you get $150,000 that you can direct towards wonderful community programs, but really professionalize your skill set and help the community by investing that skill set as well?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a student, I felt so fortunate that this class was being created at a time when I was still able to take it. And, I think there's a lot of reasons students are excited to take the course, but I think the number one is definitely the funding. It's pretty incredible to, be responsible for that amount of funding and to get to make that sort of impact. When I think back about the first year, we're all really proud of what we accomplished. At the time, it was just like, okay, we had a very generous donor at the time, and a couple of great professors, but there was no structure to it. So everything we had to build as we went along. So years later, if something comes up or there's some reference to that year, either we don't have very good data, or I don't know, something from the RFP was too wordy. I'm like, that's fair. Like we did our best.
Noted.
Yeah. But then just, to see incremental improvements that happen each year and the students taking it one step further. I think one thing that's really excited about this year's students and what their application looks like, is what their funding area is. So normally each year there's conversations around, specific focus areas. So, generally, there's a lot of interest in education programs. We've had funding for the environment, for housing, for hunger. This year's class is particularly interested in equity and addressing historical discrepancies in our region, which I think is very interesting because it's much more population focused and less about the specific activities. So they just finished receiving all of their proposals. And I think one of the challenges they're going to have, a good challenge, but they're going to have projects doing all sorts of different things. And it's really difficult to evaluate groups that are doing different work. Last year's proposal, the students were aligned, were much more focused. Their application was very much targeted on education. And so they had similar applications. They could have a much more specific process around education. And they did a really great job with it.
Well, and it seems interesting that taking something that is very strongly value-based, but maybe doesn't have direct programmatic outcomes, as you said, that match up across each organization. Of course, there's some translation and some learning there on how you would assess that equitably across all of those different grantees. I'm wondering, because you mentioned earlier that there's so many folks who apply for this funding. There's a great need in the community for a variety of things. If you could talk a little bit about the process that you bring students through when they're really trying to assess their own core values and what that mission is, that guidance, so that then when they're evaluating these competing priorities, they really feel like they can stay true to what they as a group think is important, but also knowing that you can't give money to everyone and that you can't support everything that could sound awesome but maybe isn't practical or just doesn't fit with that mission statement.
Yeah, definitely. Early on, we try to get some background and start very big picture about, what is the state of the nonprofit sector nationally? What is the state of philanthropy? How much funding is there total? And then we start to work our way down more locally. And as far as, the specific needs, we typically have a community outreach event in October, which is up to the students what that looks like exactly. Some years it's been, everybody reach out to someone in the nonprofit sector in the community that they know, and we'll sit around at the Ike box and have coffee together and sort of chat. One year they really blew it out and had 40 different people from the community, started separating them into breakout rooms to be like, this group is talking about needs. This group is talking about what it's like to apply for funding in the area. And I think that's one thing the students have done very well, is try to have a pulse on and listen to what people are saying. As far as walking through a process when they need to, make those tough decisions, I think one of the conversations that comes up a lot is, I think it's easy and natural to say, I'm going to cast a big net and we're going to find the best proposals and we're going to fund them. And, I think in practice, what we've learned is, it becomes really challenging to evaluate projects that are totally different. But the other thing that we're very sensitive to is being respectful of our applicants and our grantees' time. And if you're casting a really wide net, not giving a lot of guidance, it's challenging for the applicants to know, what exactly do you want me to put in here? How am I being evaluated? And ultimately, is it worth their time? So I think that's something else that we've become much, much better at, much more respectful of the applicant's time as well.
Well, and I would say, as someone who's worked in nonprofit and social work environments, it also helps share community skills or build some expertise in the community if there are folks that can help smaller nonprofits or nonprofits who don't necessarily go through a formal RFP process to kind of gain those skills, attempt to do it a few years and kind of build on that so that they can then translate those skills into requests for other funding from other entities. Have you seen that at all in some of the partners that you've worked with?
Yeah, I think that's something we're very sensitive to now is, the people who are on our listserv, replying quickly to emails, those tend to be larger organizations who do great work, and we funded all sorts of organizations in the community. But there's so many grassroots organizations that don't know who to get in touch with, don't have a experienced grant writer on staff. And just because an organization isn't able to submit, a sterling application, that's not necessarily a reflection of their ability to do great work in the community. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really difficult gap to bridge. I think, some of the smaller organizations that we funded have been really some of the most impactful work that we've done. And continuing to, figure out how do you reach people. And a lot of that is personal, just blasting out an email. You'll catch a lot of people, but it's not going to be everyone. So you really do have to have targeted messaging and different ways to reach out to folks.
Well, and I think compared to the first year when you were a student in this, compared to now, you're also gaining a community reputation. There's a lot more visibility of the program. And I think that would likely help you as well in the process, that more people kind of know what's going on and there's some legacy there that you can build on. In thinking about how this past year has been so different, because I've been to the awards ceremony, I've gotten to see some of the cool things that students in previous years have done. Could you speak a little bit about kind of some of the challenges students have faced in, the context of COVID and how that has changed some of the value judgments and assessments that they're doing through this?
Yeah, definitely. I think last year's students really got a raw deal. They missed out on some great closure at the end of the year. So, it was March 17th last year when the state of Oregon wanted to shut down. So right around that time is when we were planning for the second board meeting. And, even before that, when Oregon wasn't quite shut down yet, we were trying to read through the tea leaves and decide, well, can we still do this board meeting in person? Can we switch to a remote platform? This is before we were all experts on Zoom. And, I'm really glad they decided, even before they were required to, they switched to an online platform and made the best of it. But March, April, we were just very sensitive to what was going on in the nonprofit community. So I think the biggest thing was get the funding out as we promised, and really try not to overburden organizations. Had a lot to deal with. This year's students, starting in August, we had a little bit more time to plan, but it's definitely a challenge. This is all very, interpersonal, and doing all this sort of outreach and community building over Zoom is challenging. I'm not sure about that. It's been really tough. I mean, I'm incredibly proud of the students and what they have been able to accomplish given everything. Frankly, they haven't really missed a beat. I think, instead of doing a couple of our larger events, they've done a lot more smaller outreach, individual phone calls, or small groups on Zoom, which is probably, a much better use of time than having, 40 people trying to give their input. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, we all don't know what we don't know. So everyone's been in that process of trying to, figure out and translate what you would do in person into a virtual context. And I'm sure site visits have looked very differently. And like you said, community outreach has had to shift a bit. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some specific examples of cool things that have happened, either funded programs or funny site visits or things that kind of give a little bit more context and personality to this class, because it's something where you're prescriptive in some ways for the students to kind of help them build professional skills, but they have a lot of self-determination when it comes to kind of how they're going to work as a group through this process and what that's going to look like.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the exciting things we caught in the Statesman was we funded Bridgeway Recovery Services. And they had a youth music program and basically applied for some studio recording equipment for their youth outreach program. So they were funded in the first year. And then a couple years ago, there was an article in the Statesman Journal that some 16 and 17-year-olds who were in the program using that equipment had won some sort of award and were invited to go to the Grammys in Los Angeles.
Oh, wow.
They specifically called out the Willamette MBA Community Grant Program, which I was blown away that they thought to recognize us. So that was totally unanticipated, but yeah, just really, really fun and exciting. I'm trying to think of what else worth sharing. I think one of the surprises I've seen, there was an organization we invested in that does a small community kitchen. Helped upgrade their kitchen so they could serve more people. They applied again and ultimately pulled their application because they had some other funding come in, and ultimately said, this funding would be better going to another group. We don't need this. And I was just taken aback that they were choosing to walk away from a funding opportunity because they thought there were other groups that were in more need. It's just incredible how collaborative and not cutthroat.
Yeah. And I think that's the benefit of doing it in not that it's a small community, but a close-knit community where a lot of people know what other folks are working on, and kind of having you guys be liaisons to a bunch of different community organizations and help increase that communication and collaboration, like you said, can be really valuable. I'm wondering if there's anything else that you kind of want to touch on when it comes to some of the specific skills or the things that students come away with once they've gone through this process, having had to learn my own grant writing and proposal review skills. If there are specific things you can kind of touch on when it comes to how that translates into their transition into professional practice.
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of opportunities for students to develop different skills individually. This class touches on a lot of the core classes of the MBA program. There's a huge finance component as we're analyzing the nonprofit organizations. There's this big, marketing and public relations piece. We have the website, we have our social media accounts, we have our email accounts. All that needs to be managed during the year. There's a huge data modeling and analysis component, and the applications are coming in this form. This is how the data gets sped out. How do we set this up so we can easily send it out to the other students so they can actually read it and digest it in a good way? There's so many opportunities for students to develop the skills that if they want to. early on each semester, we'll go through and have a big list of basically all the work that needs to be done, assign specific roles. So students get to, own some of these very specific components that make up the class.
And that seems like it also plays on particular personalities and skill sets as well. So if you have folks who are more in the data science side of things versus those who want to do marketing or finance, or who want to take an opportunity to kind of branch out a little bit, or there's someone that's a little more introverted or extroverted, it seems like they kind of work as a team to see who fits where best and kind of how they can share some of those responsibilities as it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all about just like putting people in the right seat on the bus. There's like no shortage of opportunities or work way.
And it also seems like it's a lot of fun. I mean, I'm sure there are readings and things that they have to do, but it seems like so much of what comes out of the learning outcomes for this course is really just hands-on trying it, like experimentation and really, setting them up so that they can not fail, but like really experience what it's like to go through a realistic process that has real life consequences and outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think anytime they're able to, talk to people out in the community, site visits or phone calls, it's always, I think that's always the best part of the class. People come back with a big smile on their face, like it's so cool, like what this group is doing. So and so is so nice. I think that's definitely like what motivates people to keep going through with it. And you're right, like they definitely feel the consequences of what they're doing. And, there's definitely pain points during the year where they wish they'd done things differently, scheduled their time differently, or, any number of things. And, that's also sort of the point, that, if you were to do this again, you probably would do this a little bit differently, but you don't know what you don't know.
When thinking about is there, I know that you and Professor Thibodeau are there to kind of help with that knowledge transfer and make sure that they kind of have their best start. But is there a process where one class to the next kind of checks in with their peers and is like, hey, FYI, you might want to think about this earlier than we did?
Yeah, definitely. That's part of like, when we wrap up in April, we try to leave behind, feedback, a document, something to leave behind for the next cohort. And, it's one of the first things I'll share in August. And my guess is that sort of gets skimmed. And then, later in the year, when, they have an idea or some frustration, I'm like, I think they said that last year too. So, we definitely try to pass on that knowledge, but I think some of it is having to go through it yourself as well.
Yeah. And then you go back and you've underlined it and tabbed it 3 times. You're like, don't forget.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the next year's folder will have it in big red letters. Like, please.
we mean it this time.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think like, and anyone who's on with us, please know you're welcome to submit other questions. We've kind of collected some along the way. If there are any, particularly from the last year or so, projects that you can kind of go into a little bit more detail on what was funded, or if there have been any projects that have gone longer than a year, maybe they've applied for a second part of funding or something that has continued.
Yeah, we've definitely had, I think we have 2 or 3 organizations that have been funded multiple times now. One example was of a project that took a couple years was Liberty House. They do child abuse assessment in medical services. They were doing an expansion into Polk County, which is a huge need to be supporting our rural communities. And there was just a number of hangups in getting the new clinic up and running. So we did our 6-month check-in, 12-month check-in, and we're not there to pull the funding or anything like that. We're there to really have a conversation and hear what's going on. So the students who are having those conversations come back to the class and say like, well, I was talking to the folks at Liberty House. This is sort of the update. What's going on? How do we want to go forward? And typically the conversation goes like, well, they're still doing incredibly important work. They have this new timeline that we still think is achievable. And yeah, so, we gave them an extra year, and the clinic's up and running. And I think that's just a great way to, again, think about it more as a relationship than us being there, making decisions for them.
Well, and I think that's kind of a trend that has happened throughout the years with nonprofit organizations and social service delivery. We've really gone from trying to decide what's best for people, or that white knight savior kind of perspective, and then we're doing strength-based, empowerment-based assessments of what the community is determining is important, and trying to provide resources and make linkages so that they can carry out those goals. And I'm wondering, through the lens that you have, kind of what have you learned about our community? Where do you kind of fall in thinking about things moving forward, topics that might come up, issues that might arise when future classes are looking at what could be done?
Yeah. I think philanthropy in general, by its nature, is very hierarchical, and figuring out how to make it more democratic, how to flatten it, how for funders to be, partners and cheerleaders as opposed to being a burden is, I think, incredibly important. I think I don't know. I think in some ways I'm very encouraged from the last year, even though it had an incredibly difficult time, especially for a lot of nonprofits who, some of them haven't been able to survive the past year. But I see a lot of collaboration in this community, and a lot of people working towards the same goals.
Well, and it's interesting how we've just seen so many great examples of people pulling together and, reprioritizing, not just COVID, but with the fires and everything else that's gone on in the community lately. I'm wondering, since you kind of have three hats, as it were, you're a student in this, professor, and then you also work with United Way. If you could talk a bit about the relationship with them as a funding partner and what that support of our school has done for this program.
Yeah, absolutely. The first 3 years of the class, there was a private funder who put the money up for the students. But now United Way is the funder for the course. So my day job is working as a director at United Way, and then I moonlight as a professor. But the discussion with United Way's leadership and approval from the board of directors was really just seeing, a lot of alignment and a lot of wins. United Way, has always had a traditional grant making program, and the goal is to work together and support community partners. And by investing this funding through the students, it's really a double win, because the funding is still going out into the community to deserving nonprofit organizations. But it's also giving these students this learning opportunity as well. And that, again, was really the goal of the course, was to provide learning and leadership opportunities within the sector for really the next wave of people who not necessarily are going to be executive directors. I don't expect every student to course to go out and work for a nonprofit, but I do think the sector touches everyone's lives. And if you don't work for a nonprofit, there's a good chance most students at Willamette's MBA will serve on a board of directors at some point, or at the very least will be a donor somewhere. And anything to increase engagement and increase knowledge of the sector, I think is a win.
And I think we've also benefited from having a few students who, when they've graduated, have gone to work, like yourself, work with United Way or other community partners, or have taken those skills and translated them either into philanthropic efforts at whichever corporation or large organization they're a part of, or they've become nonprofit managers and someday will be the executive directors that we're asking for proposals and collaborating with. So that's a cool kind of continuation of the class and the impact. I'm wondering, in our last 5 to 10 minutes here, if there's anything else that folks who are with us would like to chime in about, or that you think we haven't covered from kind of the focus of the course, the experience that it has both for community partners and students, and then the impact, especially when we look at kind of the unique curricular offering that this is.
Yeah. I think one thing I haven't touched on too much is the reporting data that we do receive back from our applicants and what we're hoping to achieve with that. Again, it's a pretty tight timeline our students are on. But, one thing, we have been collecting this data for a few years now, and particularly the applicants from year 1, year 2, you're getting to a point that you could start to think about like longer-term outcomes of the work that they were doing at that time. So we have a big, ugly database with all this information in it. And our sort of dream for that is, can we really refine the data that's in there and really start to measure the impact that we're having? Is there a way to put an actual dollar value on the results, which is incredibly difficult when you're talking about, supporting education programs, feeding, these are typically, things that don't have a financial measurement to it or any sort of metric to it. But I think that's a challenge that we would like to see students continue to take on. There's a better way we can report the results of, not just what our grantees are doing, but, by investing $1 into the community grant fund, this is the return that the students will give you in the community. So that's a bigger goal that we have.
Now, in that, and I come from more of the social sciences background, but I'm wondering, we have amazing data science folks at Atkinson, but is there also going to be a connection with maybe social scientists who might be able to translate that investment into outcomes through like a social determinants of health framework or something where it says, hey, if you invest this in this neighborhood, here's life outcomes you can expect, or education attainment changes or things like that as well?
Yeah, totally. I think that really does bridge that gap between, what is the value of this activity or that activity. I used to be an intern at Family Building Blocks, which is a relief nursery and works with children age 0 to 5 years old. And but that report basically said the best investment you can make to improve economic activity in your community is to invest in relief nurseries. It's like, it's not to, it's not to, start businesses or things. It's to invest in early childhood education. You see this return 20 or 30 years down the line. And it's just an incredibly powerful message. And I'm sure there's, all sorts of other examples that might be out there.
Yeah. And I think that relates to some of the stuff I've seen with the Promised Neighborhoods initiative that the federal government has, where they focus really intensely on different underserved communities around the country and find out kind of what investment impacts they can have that really lead to big life changes when we're thinking of all these different facets that kind of improve a community without necessarily translating to exact numbers in a way. Yeah. So again, we're just at the last few minutes. So I just want to give you the opportunity to kind of share any final thoughts or things that you're really looking forward to kind of as you wrap up this year in the next few months, and then start the process all over again in August, hopefully in person, but with a little bit more virtual kind of skill set under your belt.
Yeah. I mean, I'm excited to finish the second semester strong. right now the students are in the middle of reviewing those full proposals and are getting ready for site visits in a couple weeks. The one thing I'll be excited to share with everyone once it's ready is the new annual report, which they always do a great job with. And that'll have all the new information about the new grantees, updated statistics, and we'll be ready to do it again.
That's so exciting. And we will make sure that the attendees receive a copy of that report. We've collected everyone's email addresses, so we can forward that on so people can stay connected and maybe be added to that mailing list if they're interested. But I just want to say, Professor Galen, thank you so much for sharing your insights and providing us with an update on this amazing program and some of the experiences and things that students are navigating currently or have experienced before. For those of you who joined us, we thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We hope you'll continue to turn into WooStream, our virtual programming platform. And until the next exciting presentation, we hope you all have a good evening and stay safe and healthy as you can, and hopefully connect with your own community support program to whatever extent that you can. So thank you so very much, Professor.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And I hope you have a lovely evening. And this will be posted on our YouTube site, hopefully within the next week. Take care, everybody.